Can I get everybody's attention? And that's the first thing, yes.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, I don't need that.
I know you don't, but oh, David says you do. David says you do. That's true.
Okay.
Thank you. So, okay. Greetings. Welcome to the Mushroom Club of Georgia.
Can I-
Yeah, if you get close enough.
All right. Yes. Hi. What she said. I'm Sam Landis. I am the treasurer and membership coordinator of the Mushroom Club of Georgia. And talk to me if you're interested in becoming a member and what all the awesome benefits are. And this is
I'm Cornelia Cho. I'm the president of the Mushroom Club of Georgia. We have a few other officers in this room as we speak. So we have Michael, back there, who is our secretary. And then Becky Hodge, who is our vice president. We have Eliza Croft back here, who are our taxonomist.
She's our taxonomist now.
Yes. And we have Michael Fletcher, who helps us out with all this AV technology.
Yes, yay.
So thank all those people.
Welcome, and thank you so much for coming out in 94-degree weather.
With a thunderstorm watch.
But coming to air conditioning, that's not a bad thing. And snacks is a really not bad thing. And cool mushrooms over there, even not badder. And then good to see you. And then we have on that table over there, John C. Campbell Folk School catalogs that are for you to take. Please.
We still have several boxes at home, so let us know if you want more.
And John C. Campbell Folk School is just a couple hours north, near Murphy, North Carolina. It is the oldest folk school in the country, just turned 100. And they have lots of week-long classes, usually starts on a Sunday night, goes to a Friday afternoon. Awesome blacksmithing, furniture making. I mean, there's somebody who does a class in a week where you build a ukulele. And then there are classes for if you've never played a fiddle before, by the end of the week, you'll be playing some songs. And then they also do quilting and dyeing and all kinds of stuff. And they also have
fabric dyeing.
Fabric dyeing, yeah. Oh, but honey, the cemetery is so full. And they have a nature studies program. So they have like a bird identification class and flowers and herbal things. And we took a class last year from a friend who taught a class on tree medicine and all the different medicinal things you can get from trees. But as part of the nature studies program, Cornelia and I teach a week-long class twice a year, usually in July and September, called Mushroom Immersion. And it's IDing, it's eating mushrooms, it is dyeing silk and wool using just mushrooms, it's making mushroom paper. It's a lot of different cool things. And so it's in the catalog. We're happy to answer any questions about it. Cornelia's run off that way. So is everybody ready for a big 4th of July weekend, whatever that means for you? Woo! It's the next weekend that's the really big celebration. So Saturday, Saturday, July 11th, right here in this room, is our summer chanterelle potluck. And usually every year it's been our summer chanterelle potluck and dance party. Some people have grumbled a little bit at that because, we'll have 40 people here and 8 of us will be on the dance floor. But you know what? We're having a heck of a time. So that is 11:30 to 4. Come at 11 if you want to help set up a little bit and get your dish labeled. You do not have to make a mushroom dish. You do not have to make a vegetarian or vegan dish. I mean, just you have to make a delicious dish. And we'll label them. And some of our members are vegetarians, some are vegans, some are just straight out omnivores. Be careful, they'll eat the plates. And, but it's just a really great time for good food and also getting to know your other members. That's one of the aspects of our club that to me is important is the social aspect of meeting like-minded people who like to be in the woods. And you know, we have a lot of people here who are members of herbal societies and all kinds of different nature-based studies or groups. So we can learn from each other and have a lot of fun. But that's Saturday the 11th. And after you go home in the food coma and you sit in front of the air conditioner and watch a FIFA game and all that, then you get up Sunday morning and we have a MCG walk, members only walk on Sunday the 12th in Lithonia. And all members will be getting an email about that at the beginning of the week, next week. And that's 9:30 to like 12:30. And this last walk that you saw the pictures of in the newsletter, which was really fun, you know, we included a picnic. So we didn't actually get a chance to do as much identification at the tables as I would like. So, Eliza, are you going to be able to come on the 12th? Okay. Because I really want at the end of that walk for us to slam the ID stuff hard, make people's minds go, what? So you get all the emails, and I'm the contact people for all that stuff. But you're welcome. We love to have you come, and you just gain a new family. Sure. Then you need to tell me to shut up. So NAMA is the North American Mycological Association. It is the big umbrella organization that kind of oversees all the different clubs around North America, including Canada and Mexico. And we are an affiliate member. If you ever want to join NAMA, you get like a $3 or $4 discount because you're an affiliate member. Why would you belong to NAMA? They have great webinars with speakers from all over the country, more than we're able to do. They are a great resource for identification, and Cornelia is on the medicinal committee. But one of the things they do every year is hold a large national, I guess international, Canada, Mexico, foray, which will usually have between 300 to 400 people at. And they move it from different parts of the country every year or the continent so that you get a chance to, one, hunt mushrooms at a place you've never been before with people who live there. And two, you get to really make friends with people who live all over the country who have been doing this for 40 or 50 years, or people who just joined a week ago. You know, it's just a really great learning experience, and they have speakers and walks and the ID tables. Sunday morning, they have a walkthrough of the ID tables, and usually at the end of a NAMA foray, they have identified at least 500 species. And it's a great way to learn. It's a great way to see the country. And this year, it is August 27th through 30th, and it is in Marquette, Michigan, right up at the tip of the UP, the Upper Peninsula. So apparently the mushrooming there is really good. And it's different this year in that a lot of times we stay in dorms. We're going to be staying at separate hotels. You have to make your own hotel reservation, and there are campgrounds too. But it's a great experience. We helped host one, what, 4 years ago maybe, at Hendersonville, North Carolina, which was really, really great. Okay, I'm done talking.
Right.
Introduce.
Okay. So we are very excited to have Josh Lipson come talk to us from Emory. He's a clinical psychologist and psychedelic researcher with the Emory Center for Psychedelics and Spirituality. So really cool intersection of two disciplines. And there's so much happening. It's very exciting to have previously, like being a mushroom club president, I would tell people, that didn't know me, and they would say, "Oh, what kind of mushrooms?" And that isn't happening anymore. People don't say that. And it's like, wow, tell me about this. Josh is going to tell you about this. So, so thank you, Josh. We appreciate it. All right, turn it over to you.
Is this mic on? Is this okay? Great. Well, I'm so thrilled to be joining Mushroom Club today. I've gotten to know some of you. I initially met Sam and some of you at the Mushroom Festival. Uh, First, the one back in November, and then delighted that there was another one only 6 months later. Um, and when I was thinking about how to frame this talk, um, I thought of a mycological metaphor. I like to talk about most of the time the explosion in psychedelic research that's happened in the last 10 years and accelerated even more in the last 5 years through a geological metaphor, an evolutionary metaphor, the Cambrian explosion. But I thought a more fitting one for the Mushroom Club would be a mycelial explosion, because a big theme here is also interconnection between different disciplines and between different institutions that otherwise were doing this in very separate, cloistered ways before. And I think part of what I want to say today is that I'm probably the most mushroom naive person in the room. That's not to say I haven't had, I love eating culinary mushrooms. I have had experiences with psilocybin mushrooms. I'm not going to play that toy game. But what I mean is, I don't come to this from the angle of somebody who has cultivated an enthusiasm for the mushroom kingdom across the board. It's not what I research. I find it fascinating, but I'm a psychologist. And I come at this from the angle of psychedelics and what they do to the mind, what they do to consciousness and behavior. And of course, you ask people kind of, especially today, maybe less so in the 60s and 70s, what is the paradigmatic psychedelic or psychedelic carrying species? They would say psilocybin mushrooms. But at the same time, in the psychedelic research world, a lot of the time, there's kind of a reductiveness. People talk about the compound, psilocybin, but not about the mushrooms they come from, not about the other alkaloids that are present in those mushrooms. And so there's still a lot I have to learn from the mycophile community about the mushrooms themselves, but I still look forward to hopefully offering you guys something new from the perspective of psychedelic research circa 2026. And I also, it's kind of tough, catering to an audience like this, because I don't know how much background people have on the state of psychedelic research these days. I assume there's some people who know every single bit in this slide, maybe with the exception of specific details about our study at Emory. And there might be people who are psychedelic novices. So I'm going to try to strike a balance here. Once my slides are available to me. And yeah, we'll start here. And is my clicker working? Okay, sweet. So I captioned this where psychedelic science is headed. clinically, culturally, and spiritually, and the harder truths coming along for the ride. Um, because my current specialty at Emory right now is studying the nuanced benefit risk profile of psychedelics. It's not just the story that has somehow become mainstream in the last 5 to 10 years that psychedelics are really, really awesome, is great. They are. Uh, but it's not the complete story of psychedelics and what will happen as they're normalized societally and unleashed upon a world with lots of problems to start. Uh, so again, I am a research fellow, a postdoctoral research fellow at the Emory Center for Psychedelics and Spirituality, which I believe is the first psychedelic research center in the South. And aside from that, is a really special place because number one, we don't treat spirituality and religion as incidental to the study of psychedelics. Um, a lot of psychedelic science in the first 15 to 20 years of this century was almost embarrassed by the fact that psychedelics can give people the sense of being closer to God, more spiritually or mystically tuned in. Uh, a lot of Western science, including a lot of Western psychology, and psychology, literally in Greek, by the way, means the study of the soul. Psyche means soul originally, not mind. Um, so there is a lot of embarrassment around dealing with this subject in Western psychology and Western science. But Emory's Center for Psychedelic Research is a collaboration between Emory Psychiatry and Emory Spiritual Health, where there is no shyness about engaging with the spiritual and religious import of psychedelics to individuals and real world religious communities. So that's something that drew me to it. I did my PhD at the at Columbia University clinical psychology department at the Spirit Mind Body Institute, um, formerly the Lab for Spirituality and Psychology. So this has been the context in which I've studied psychedelics, their effect on people for a long time. So I found a home of like-minded collaborators. Um, so with that, I want to give some context on what people have called the psychedelic renaissance. So I realize that these slides are pretty brief, and I want to give some context that sort of stitches between the slides. So um, I'll give a very quick rundown. I don't want to tell the whole story of psychedelic research. Psychedelic research, as I actually have learned more recently, goes all the way back to the turn of the 20th century, research that was being done with mescaline. But famously, LSD was discovered 1943, synthesized a few years before, but its psychoactive properties were discovered in 1943 by Albert Hofmann in Switzerland. And it was only in the 1950s that psilocybin, while people knew about psilocybin mushrooms being used ritually and in a spiritual religious context in Mesoamerica, psilocybin was an isolated, as an alkaloid, until about a decade, if not a little bit more, than after the synthesis of LSD. There was a lot of research promise and excitement around psychedelics in the 50s and especially 60s. And then, of course, culture panicked, the government panicked. There was a moratorium, more or less, on psychedelic research until a little trickle began in the 1990s, DMT research in New Mexico. And then in 2006, there was the first big watershed study that ushered in the psychedelic renaissance using psilocybin at Johns Hopkins University, demonstrating the ability of psilocybin to, I love this clinical language, occasion mystical experience. Um, so, you can study this in the lab. There's really no better way to study spiritual and mystical experience on demand than by giving people psychedelics. They don't guarantee a spiritual or mystical experience, but they are probably the most reliable democratic way to create them for people. And not everybody from spiritual and religious traditions uh, agrees that this is an appropriate route to spiritual and mystical experience, but many do. Anyway, since 2006, there's been an effort to build the evidence base for psychedelics as um, having really profound effects on consciousness. That one seems like a no-brainer, but a lot of what science does, especially psychological science, is catches up with what people already know, what grandmothers already know, what little underground communities already know, and formalizing it and measuring. And so we in the field spent a decade and a half formalizing this, building a clinical evidence base for psychedelics uh, ability under the right circumstances to help with people's depression, end of life anxiety, addictions, PTSD. There are a whole host of possible stories that have been told about why psychedelics have the power to help with this. And it's notable that again and again, of the compounds that we're talking about, psilocybin is one of the two most common ones being investigated for all these uh, for all of these indications. But more recently, I think there's been a turn, a big watershed moment. I see the book on the table. In 2018 was the publication of How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, which I think brought the story psychedelics and their potential to a much wider audience than had been privy to it before. And this also meant more and more mainstream acceptance, at the very least, for psychedelic research and psychedelics use to help treat mental illness and suffering. So in 2026, I think it's pretty safe to say that psychedelic research is no longer fringe. It's actually bipartisan. Something that strikes me as miraculous is that in today's cultural and political climate, so many things have become sources of polarization. There are fewer and fewer things that bring people together around a common narrative. And shockingly, I don't think anyone would have predicted this in the late 1960s. Psychedelics seem to be one of those things. Um, there have been multiple bipartisan initiatives on the state level in states like Texas and Kentucky, but also in the U.S. House. If you can imagine U.S. representatives like Matt Gaetz and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez coming together to co-sponsor initiatives to free up federal funding for psychedelic research. That's the world we're living in. And Donald Trump recently signed an executive order. I'm not exactly sure what the direct implications will be, essentially easing the ability of the federal government to appropriate funds for psychedelic research. The focus on ibogaine, which is a very interesting psychedelic compound that comes from iboga, a plant from Central West Africa that's very useful in the treatment of addiction. But all of this is to say, um, we can have a broader conversation about psychedelics, what they do, and how they affect consciousness now, because all of a sudden there's a pretty wide bipartisan consensus around. There's more and more consensus in medical schools and a little bit slower, but in psychology departments around the fact that psychedelics are worthy of study. And just for some background, I first got interested in psychedelics when I was 21 in 2013. And back then, it felt like stumbling into a secret, into something that was taboo. it was extra exciting for that reason, but I could never have dreamed of having this kind of open conversation about it, about having a job in which I was specifically hired to do psychedelic research. So we've come a long way. And what it means is that we don't just have to talk about psychedelics and how they help with mental illness. Obviously, that's still an important spearhead. There are a lot of very high stakes initiatives on the state level and also in the FDA approval process that are geared at getting psychedelics authorized for the treatment of specific psychological and psychiatric conditions. Okay, but now, compared to 10 or 15 years ago, it is much roomier an area of research. So there is now much more appetite and much more funding to do research on, for example, and we're talking in some cases, the first above board research on these things since the 60s on how psychedelics can change personality, right? And what's great is that as more and more research begins to emerge, there are studies that point in opposite directions. Psychedelics durably change personality. Psychedelics, change other things, but don't change personality very durably. How psychedelics change people's worldview, people's sense, for example, that non-human creatures and even objects may possess consciousness. Uh, More and more research into psychedelics' effect on creativity. There's an entire center in Houston, the Center for Minds, that is purely dedicated to studying psychedelics and their impact on creativity, scientific and artistic creativity. So, there's this sense that the grown-up concern with psychedelics is, can they help people heal from illness and trauma? And everyone agrees that that's very important. And then there are some people in the spiritual and religious world who say the only thing that really, really matters is, do psychedelics create spiritual experiences in a sense of spiritual connectedness? Okay. But at the Center for Minds, for example, the researchers say we are setting aside the questions of healing and spirituality. What if psychedelics just make better scientists, better jazz musicians? And by the way, these are things that were being studied in the 50s and 60s. So really, we're coming back into a field of inquiry that was interrupted, except that now we have much better tools to study these things. There's even more study, for example, of people's specific phenomenology of experience on psychedelics. So not just did you have a mystical experience? Did you have a good trip? Did you have a challenging experience? But more in-depth questions about people's experiences with entities, like when people have experiences on psychedelics, sometimes mushrooms, but maybe more often on ayahuasca and DMT, their encounters with spirits, animal spirits, spirits that feel interplanetary, spirits that feel ancestral. Um, these are open secrets in the psychedelic world. Now, more and more, it's possible to sit in an academic department and say, we want to study this. We're not going to round this out because it's embarrassing or it doesn't agree with the presuppositions of Western psychology. More integrative. Uh, so more and more people from different fields of inquiry are coming together and creating centers like the one we have at Emory. So there, for a while, had been silos where neuroscientists would study the effects of psychedelics on the brain, on the molecular level. Like, we've learned a lot in the past 20 years about how psilocybin affects the brain. It first and foremost is very closely related to serotonin, and it stimulates a particular class of serotonin receptor, 5-HT2A receptor, and there are more and more developed models of how that leads to a cascade that changes patterns of functional connectivity in the brain for the duration of a trip, and then in some ways leads to more durable, subtle changes in what parts of the brain talk to each other. These were things that we didn't know in the 50s and 60s. But now it's more and more possible for, in an interdisciplinary context, people who study the pharmacology and the neuroscience to talk to the people who study phenomenology of consciousness, to put people in fMRI scanners and uh, explore questions of what is specifically happening in someone's consciousness, in their conscious experience, in their perception. And again, we now at a center that asks questions like these, uh, director of our center is both a clinical psychologist and an ordained minister. Um, my direct mentor and the director of research projects at our center at Emory has a master's in divinity as well as being a clinical psychologist. So more and more, we're able to bring all of these perspectives into the room when we craft research studies. And I think this is really powerful. Psychedelics also have become, uh, in a way, so is anyone familiar with the quote? I believe it was a quote from Stan Grof. Anyone know Stan Grof? So Stan Grof, famous Czech psychiatrist who spearheaded a lot of psychedelic research, the father of transpersonal psychology, got his start in the 50s. He's still alive. He's in his mid 90s, I think. And I believe his quote, it could have been one of the other psychedelic luminaries, was one day psychedelics will be to the study of the mind, of consciousness, uh, as the telescope was the study of the stars, as the microscope was the study of ourselves. Something along those lines. Don't quote me verbatim. But the point is, more and more of the leading researchers around the world who study information processing and computation and the fundamental nature of consciousness itself are looking to psychedelics to generate models and theories of how the mind processes information, constructs reality, and what consciousness is made of. So, again, this is a dramatic turn from where psychedelic research was 10 or 15 years ago. And then I also just want to say, um, although sober is a loaded word, and what is sober and what is real is to some degree a relative concept, I would also say that psychedelic research is getting more sober about the risks and difficulties that come with the use of psychedelics, not just the promise of psychedelics to treat suffering in controlled clinical environments. And I'm going to be talking more about this at a later point when I spotlight some of the research that I'm focusing on this year at Emory. Okay, I think we're running into the same issue. Let's see. Cool. Okay. So again, I won't belabor the point because I've said this before, but I do think that this is helpful. And I was talking to someone in the audience before about when we talk about psychedelic research, um, and you know what? Let's actually set the spirit one aside. There's the there's the kind of wet lab where we study psychedelics and what they do to the brain. So there's psychedelic research by neuroscientists and molecular biologists and chemists to some degree who are investigating how psychedelics affect the brain. That's one kind of research. Another kind of research is done in clinical studies where we actually give people psychedelics, right? Where we're trying to see what happens under controlled conditions where we know what's going on, how much we gave them, exactly what it was, um, their exact mental health background going into it. And then we try to measure the effects on one or more variables. How much of a mystical experience did this produce? How much did it help people achieve remission from their depression or anxiety? So that's in the clinic. But another avenue of research, people are always asking me, so do you give people psychedelics, or, isn't that illegal? Or, can I get some? Uh, Classic. Like, I get that all the time. What I say is, you might be able to somewhere. There's more and more authorization at more and more research centers and at just clinical sites to get dosed with psilocybin or sometimes other things, MDMA, LSD, DMT, 5-MeO DMT, ibogaine, you name it, at research clinics. But my primary area of interest, what I did my dissertation on before coming to Emory when I was at Columbia, and also my main priority at Emory right now, is the study of what psychedelics do in the wild, right? I think that whatever happens with federal clinical approval for the use of psychedelics, more people are still going to be doing psychedelics in the wild on their own terms, for their own reasons, with their friends, at home, in nature, than in any medicalized clinical setting. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. I think it really depends. But I'm interested in the study of how psychedelics affect people in the immediate experience and down the line in real life, in real world settings, as I like to say, in the wild. And as I'll explain soon, studying that provides certain opportunities that you can't get when you're studying the effects of psychedelics in a clinical setting, but it also brings up some challenges too. You don't know if you can trust everything someone's saying. Nobody really knows how much they took of something. Um, so all of those concerns, but I just figured I would kind of lay out the different kinds of psychedelic research. Um, and briefly speaking, and I don't know if these are fully up to date, but something that's really important is about 2 years ago, we thought that the first psychedelic compound, and I use psychedelic loosely because I'm not sure I would call this a psychedelic myself, but it looked like the first psychedelic compound that was going to get federal approval as a medicine was going to be MDMA. Lycos, the public benefit corporation spinoff of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association Psychedelic Studies, had what had seemed up until a certain point a very successful set of trials and bid for federal approval as a treatment for PTSD. For a number of reasons I won't get into, it was denied. It was very disappointing. And now it looks like psilocybin is going to be the first psychedelic compound approved by the FDA as a medicine in the treatment of depression. And there's a whole protocol behind this. There are a lot of administrative and political and regulatory considerations about the way it's being used. It's sort of being, some of these clinical trials look toward a psychedelic combined with a program of therapy. It turns out the FDA doesn't know what to do uh, about regulating therapy because it doesn't, and that's never been anything under its purview. So some of the more recent trials that have been advanced try to strip away therapy thing. Um, but what we're seeing is enormous success in these trials if you compare them to other approved, heavily funded, huge market cap treatments for depression out there. And by that, I mean drug treatments. Um, Huge effect sizes. Um, it's not that everybody is cured of their depression. It's not even that everybody experiences an improvement at all. But the share of people who do and the magnitude of the improvement dwarfs, the evidence base for a lot of things that have become uncontroversial prescription drugs over the last 30 to 40 years. Um, so phase 3 trials are beginning to hit their primary endpoints for uh, these psilocybin for depression trials. Um, that means end of the line, and it becomes a matter of the FDA moving to make a decision. So a lot of people are talking about end of this year, the beginning of early 2027. Um, so things are moving really impressively on this front. And I cannot tell you how many different trials are being run by different organizations all over the country right now. And several biotech and pharma sponsors are running trials at Emory right now, including trials of psilocybin for PTSD, which is pretty interesting because up until now, there's been more attention given to MDMA as a treatment or a treatment with adjunctive therapy for PTSD. And there are other studies looking at the basic safety and efficacy, for example, into psilocybin for older adults going on at Emory. So this is happening at huge scale. I am not able to keep track of the clinical trial landscape, and my direct involvement with this side of research has so far been relatively limited. But could somebody help with the slides? And I'm sorry, I also want to encourage people to call out if they have questions. We're gonna have. So I think I've already talked about this stuff actually. We're beginning to really make space since 2018 for studies into psychedelics in the real world, not just for clinical and mental health indications, but how they change people's worldview, personality, um, the spiritual experiences they create, um, how they're metabolized by people in different religious and spiritual communities. I'll even give a shout out because I was recently talking to someone about this. Uh, but for example, there have been small scale studies. Again, and a lot of these are being done in settings that are very different from a lab or a clinic. But there have even been small scale studies looking into psychedelics and peace building and reconciliation in the Israeli Palestinian conflict. So that's just one example of something that I think catches people's eyes a lot, or the use of psychedelics to treat um, PTSD in conflict zones, which is controversial. But the point is, uh, the research is getting more and more imaginative and more linked to the real world. And I mentioned 2018 because 2018 was a watershed for the study of psychedelics um, and how they affect people in the wild at large scale. So 2018 was the first paper to come out of the uh, psychedelic research program at Imperial College London, looking at, I think it was 653 people who were planning on having a psychedelic experience and asking them questions 2 weeks before, 1 week before, a day or two after, 2 weeks after, 4 weeks after, about a whole range of things. And so trying to track over time how a psychedelic experience may have impacted them. May have impacted their personality, may have affected their mood and well-being. And so a lot came out of that research. But prior to that, nobody had ever tried to ask hundreds or thousands of people about their real world psychedelic experiences in real time and see what that impact might look like on them. So I built my dissertation around this data set in collaboration with Robin Carhart Harris, who's probably at this point the most prolific psychedelic researcher in the world, and his team. And that has opened the door for a lot of US based studies to this effect. A smaller but really groundbreaking study at Emory, psilocybin use in naturalistic settings, is all about tracking all kinds of interesting data around people moving through the world day to day, um, before and after an experience with psilocybin or with mushrooms. And this has laid the groundwork for the study that I am most excited about, that I spend every day working on at Emory. So yeah, I guess I've said some of this already, but ECPS, what I love about it is that we do all these forms of work. For example, I'm not directly involved, but through a partnership with a center in Colorado, we're doing a trial for of psilocybin for major depression, and doing all kinds of really interesting data collection around it, monitoring people's moods and activity throughout the day using very innovative recording uh, techniques, while also asking them questionnaires. Um, Again, as I said, we're also the site for really interesting MDMA and also psilocybin for PTSD for combat veterans research happening here in Brookhaven, uh, you know, as part of our center's work. Um, and we're also really interested, something that we've pioneered at Emory is the study of how different religious communities in the United States today think about and use psychedelics. So the fastest one out of the gate is a huge study of 1,100 plus Jewish Americans and their attitudes toward psychedelics and their practices with psychedelics. We also published the first paper from the first ever and up until now only ever study of Muslim Americans' engagement with psychedelics. We are doing a study of Christian clergy attitudes toward and experiences with psychedelics. We're and several other Christian communities engagement with psychedelics coming down the pike. So again, we're really interested in not just studying the spiritual implications of psychedelic experience, but not just generic kumbaya spirituality and it was all one white light, but what do profound psychedelic experiences mean to people who are already embedded in a faith community and in a particular religious worldview? Um, and finally, we're really interested in at scale, talking about the scale of hundreds, thousands, understanding a little bit more about the dark side of what psychedelics can sometimes do to people and why, and maybe what can help with that. So that's what I'm leading toward. The part that we don't skip. Granted, there has been some study into challenging experiences in psychedelics, colloquially known as bad trips. There are some people who like to say there's no such thing as a bad trip. There's only a challenging experience. It's very optimistic, and the jury's out about what the best thing to, I think it's a personal choice what to call uh, an experience that isn't all sunshine and roses. I'm not going to tell somebody, don't say bad trip. That's wrong. Some of this feels like an effort to whitewash the psychedelic experience so that the mainstream will be more accepting of it. But newsflash, when you lie about things or when you whitewash things, um, the the truth and the nuance eventually tends to come out, and that makes people trust you less. So, what we believe, we are not anti-psychedelics. On the contrary, everyone on our team who I know, myself included, really believes in the potential of psychedelics to heal, to enchant, to inspire. But we believe in telling the full story about the full spectrum possible effects of psychedelics. And this is important for a number of reasons, not least the trust of the public in the scientific. Yeah. Yeah. If I wasn't clear, naturalistic is the research community's preferred term for what I like to call in the wild. Yeah. So what's interesting is, right, the clinical trials produce astounding results. Like generally speaking, low levels of difficult experience, high levels of mystical breakthrough, and then high levels of clinical change. That's fantastic, but how representative is this? Because people take psychedelics in a range of different contexts for a range of different reasons, uh, under a range of different internal and external conditions. Um, so a lot of these clinical trials, too, I will say, uh, don't ask in depth about adverse effects. They ask about, did you have a challenging experience? They don't follow up most of the time and ask a week or two or 4 or 8 later, are you still potentially having any trouble? And if they do, it's usually a very limited checklist of broad buckets of, I thought I was going to die. Um, I felt physically uncomfortable. Uh, but a lot of the time, when you talk to people who've had challenging experiences with psychedelics or lasting difficulties, the picture is much more interesting and nuanced, and no two are exactly the same. And it's also worth drawing a distinction between bad trip slash challenging experience refers to difficulties during the trip while under the acute effects of a psychedelic. But then there are also lasting, challenging effects, lasting adverse effects beyond the trip. Just like people love to talk about the benefits that last beyond a good trip, it's also important to talk about the difficulties that last beyond the trip. So, in a global 2025 survey of naturalistic psychedelic use that really tried to hone in on this, almost half of people said they experienced a difficulty lasting more than 24 hours at least once. So this isn't necessarily uh, 50% every time, or it's a 50% coin flip. Rather, if people have a certain number of experiences, eventually, it's about 50% chance they'll come up on something. Anyway, that's one measure. And in various surveys we've looked at, about 1 to 10% of people report some kind of difficulty lasting beyond a year. And we're talking about a wide range of things. So this could be depression and anxiety. It could be existential struggle, like this world isn't real, or I don't know it's real anymore, or all of the reasons I was told that doing things in life matter no longer makes sense to me. Uh, Challenges with sleep, challenges with perception, that could be hallucinations, that could be feeling off in terms of touch, sight, sound. So all of these, have been reported, but we feel the need for deeper dive. I see Sam raising his hand.
How many of those were there prior to
Often not. And the thing is, what I'm getting at is there have been attempts to begin to study adverse effects from psychedelics, but really unsatisfactory so far. So generally speaking, no. Um, and that's a problem, right? Yes. What's your name? Ryan. Hey. Yeah. Oh. Well, we're gonna wait for Ryan to finish.
given that this is in a naturalistic or in the wild type of environment, some of those
Yeah.
contaminated or
Great question. Yeah, this is an inherent challenge to naturalistic. So Ryan asked, given that a lot of these studies are asking people about their experiences in the wild, uh, can we be sure that what they thought they took is what they took? Was it adulterated, laced, potentially? What's funny is that mushrooms are pretty much one of the only things, well, peyote too, um, ayahuasca, like, the actual brew with the actual leaf and vine. These are the things that pretty unlikely to be laced or laceable, but it is true that what someone is being told is LSD or certainly MDMA could not be. So this is an inherent challenge that we have to keep in mind. And that's actually why some of the research that we've done at our center at Emory, like the psilocybin use in naturalistic settings, focused on psilocybin and mushrooms, not just because they're the most widely used psychedelic in the United States, which is substantiated by really good research, epidemiological research, but also because it's the hardest to fake. Psilocybin mushrooms are psilocybin mushrooms. Maybe someone gave you another mushroom that wasn't psychoactive, but unlikely. Uh, they're unlikely to be adulterated with some other mind-altering compound. I'm just going to move ahead, and then I want to make space for discussion after I'm done with the slides, which always take longer than I expect. I'm always like, I don't have enough material, but I think we have plenty. So we're trying to build the missing toolkit here at Emory. I work on a few things, but this is the project I work on in some capacity every day, the post-psychedelic challenges study. And for anyone who is interested in possibly enrolling, I have cards with QR codes. And specifically, people are eligible for this study if they meet very simple criteria. If they have ever had a challenging experience with a psychedelic, defined pretty broadly, we're including MDMA, we're including ketamine, um, that lasted beyond the trip that they believe was caused by the psychedelic. Um, Cannabis doesn't count. Um, I also learned in the course of screening participants that nitrous oxide doesn't count. It was really unfortunate because someone came to talk to me about this who had some, really difficult experiences coming back to Earth for a few days or weeks after an experience with nitrous. And unfortunately, our study proposal doesn't mention it. So sorry. But if you've ever had difficulties that you believe were caused by psychedelics that lasted beyond the trip, you're eligible. We'll pay you. We'll talk to you. We'll send you a survey. I can get into the logistical details more later. But the point of this study is to fill in all the gaps, characterize the full range of difficulties, not just ask about 5 or 10 categories, but we ask about 242 specific items of, did you experience this or that or that? Or suddenly you felt electricity pulsing within you, or you felt like you were under the attack of demons, or standard questions about anxiety or depression, or I no longer felt like the people I was talking to were real. So we ask about that, but we ask about it in very careful context. We ask, and this is addressing Sam's question, we ask about people's mental health history at baseline in great detail. We ask about their the timeline of when they had this psychedelic experience, what they took, the best of their knowledge. Shout out to Ryan's question. Uh, what their intentions were, what the context was, um, what they were expecting. Then we ask about, any potential difficulties that they had in the aftermath, how long they lasted, how they affected their life, um, and also the degree to which they've come back from those difficulties and what helped them or didn't help them come back from those difficulties. So we ask about all of these things. And what's also really valuable is for people whose experiences are relatively recent, started within the last year, we track them longitudinally. We invite them back to do follow-up surveys every 2 months for a year so that we can see with some degree of reliability how this is all evolving over time. We also are launching a part of the study where we do weekly voice diary check-ins for anybody experiencing recent and ongoing difficulties. And also for people whose survey responses are really interesting to us, we invite them to come back to us for an in-depth hour-long interview. We're really trying to get at the details of the experience and the story as the person understands it, him or herself. And so, yeah, the goal is to characterize the full range of difficulties, understand maybe what predicts them, to help people make informed decisions for themselves or for people in their care about whether it looks like a relatively safe bet or not to have a psychedelic experience. And we're also interested in knowing what helps people get through challenges if they do come up, and to build integration and treatment protocols grounded in science, which has been something that's sorely lacking. There are teams of well-meaning, serious people trying this all over the world. It has never been done. We are recruiting 800 psychonauts for this study. It has never been done at anything near this scale, this level of detail, with this much longitudinal follow through. And we're also recruiting another 800 people who've had adverse effects from meditation, which is something that some people find surprising, but it happens. I think it actually underscores the fact that psychedelics are maybe not so uniquely risky, because meditation has caused destabilization in people's lives too, and destabilized people's mental health and perceptions. So we're in even greater need right now of 800 people who've experienced adverse effects from meditation. We pay for participation in these studies, and we pay additionally for example, an in-depth interview or enrollment in the longitudinal arm, voice diaries. So that's kind of the spiel about the post-psychedelic challenges study, which I was hired specifically to help with this. It is sort of like a dream continuation of the work I was doing on my dissertation at Columbia. The second I got on my first call with Dr. Roman Politsky at Emory about this position and this study was like, basically, if you want this, it's yours. And I was like, definitely want it. So I've been working on it every day since. Even when traveling in France, I was working on it most days. Sam and I were emailing from when I was in Europe. But so just a real quick preview. I would love to share more. I was presenting these findings. The only people who've heard about this up until now were at the Association for Psychological Science in Barcelona about a month ago. So our early sampling is telling us some really interesting stuff, and there's going to be a punchline on the next slide. We've already had 165 people fill out our baseline survey. It's more than that. It's probably about 180. Huge age range from 21 to 78, mean age of about 44. 27% of these people had an adverse experience or an experience that led to adverse effects, lasting adverse effects within the past year. But actually, the average duration of the adverse effects that we've looked at in the study is 1 to 3 years. We sometimes talk to people who are talking about a week, and that counts. But a lot of people are coming to us and talking about long-standing adverse effects. No single symptom profile fits everyone, but the most common lasting adverse effects tend to be related to anxiety and depression, people coming out at least temporarily more anxious or more depressed on one measure or another. Also, a non-trivial percentage of people in our sample reporting that they were worried that they were going to die, worried that the trip would, or that the adverse effects would last forever. And again, this is people talking about after the experience, they're still having this. And then what we're also about to start doing, because the data really blew us away, is a very large percentage of people, on the order of 30 to 40% of people in the sample, report, or actually no, if you combine them, I think something on the order of 45% of people in our psychedelic sample reported some form of major sleep disturbance in the aftermath of the psychedelic experience. So we're going to be doing a case study on that. But the point is, no single symptom profile fits everyone. These are just some preliminary findings. I'm happy to share more. I'm happy to share a poster that I presented a little bit over a month ago to APS. But here's the kicker. Okay, when you ask the data what psychedelic means, more often than not, in a majority of cases, we're talking about mushroom experience. 54% of the time, the answer is mushroom. We have a fair number of people talking about experiences with LSD, fair number of people talking about experiences with MDMA, but the majority of people in this study are talking about an experience they had with mushrooms. And I think that's really important. And a caveat I want to make is that it remains to be seen, but I don't think this means that mushrooms are riskier than other psychedelic compounds. That is not what I think it means. I have a lot of research assistants and research coordinators who are not particularly familiar with psychedelic culture, who haven't used psychedelics themselves, and who came to me. They were like shocked. They were like, getting so many mushroom cases because we screen people. Anyone who expresses interest in the study, we talk to on Zoom before we even enroll to determine a fit. And it's a great time, and we hear a lot of interesting stories. We sit with people's difficulty and pain, and I think help people feel heard. But people are like, I'm hearing a lot of mushroom stories. Those mushrooms must be particularly insidious. And I say, honestly, it's just that I think that more people are doing mushrooms than anything else. I think there are actually many good reasons to be doing mushrooms more than anything else. That's my personal opinion. But again, a majority of the people in this data set are talking about experiences with mushrooms. Lex, right?
Is it on? Okay. I feel like what I'm about to say does not deserve a mic.
Let's go.
But mainly, like, mushrooms are the one thing a dummy could take a handful of, and I could tell there's people who are thinking exactly the same thing as me. Like, no one just takes a handful of LSD thinking everything's going to be okay. But
I don't know. I've heard
I think,
stories.
I think a lot of people, when they're taking mushrooms, they have no idea how much to take, what it means to take it. Do I have a little bit? Do I have a lot? And
Yeah.
I think in the wild, there's just so many variables in like quantity of what people take. And I think that, if anything, it's not accessibility, or it's just more so that when someone gives you a bunch of mushrooms, what do you do with it?
I mean, that could totally be it too. I appreciate your point, and potency varies from strain to strain, from batch to batch, I'm sure. I'm no expert in this. And so maybe I spoke too soon. Like, I don't think that mushrooms are particularly dangerous, but you may have a point about this being a unique quality of people's mushroom.
And also, do you take into consideration the setting? Because it's a lot different to be sitting in a clearing in the woods versus being at a EDM concert. You know?
Yeah. I mean,
And to that point, we have somebody from the Zoom audience listing specifically about his experiences. Most of the positive ones were in the woods. The one negative one was actually at a dance club. So here it is. Okay.
I'm very pro woods. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Can
to
I
each
just
their own.
read you what he said? So
Sure.
he said, my 5 experiences with psilocybin were 4 excellent, life changing, 1 negative, overwhelming. Difference in experiences had 100% to do with environment. Great experiences during hikes through redwoods, stay at the beach, friendly gathering of friends. Negative experience was from using it in an all-night nightclub with a crush of people. The darkness, the lights were just overwhelming. So negative one did not linger, however. So that's what he said.
Yeah.
Other ones were life changing.
There are actually a number of interesting. Sorry, did you want to add something?
But so technically, though, would that be considered in the wild because it's not clinical?
Oh, okay. So this has actually raised a number of important points I just want to address. So we ask people are eligible for this study no matter what setting they took it in, no matter the intention. They could have been in a clinical trial. They could have been anywhere. Could have been for healing. It could have been just for fun. You are eligible, and we will ask you about it. We ask very in-depth questions about set and setting, full stop. So that's one thing. And I think, we'll see interesting patterns. I have never quite seen the appeal of taking mushrooms or LSD at a club. Some people do, and I think it really depends on someone's sensibilities. So there's that. Another thing that Cornelia brought up that I think is, and this is actually specifically the person on Zoom brought up, and Cornelia translated, is that I'm really glad to hear that your difficult experience resolved and didn't last. So one thing that we're mindful of is the fact that sometimes people have really challenging experiences and they don't lead to lasting adverse effects. So the study is specifically about lasting adverse effects. Another thing I want to say is that we also do not like pigeonhole an experience as positive or negative, or the lasting effects have been overall positive or negative. You could have had a phenomenal life-changing experience, um, except that you now feel tingling electric sensations in your hands and feet, and it's really annoying and frustrating. But you don't regret it, and your life has overall been changed for the better. You're still eligible for the study because you have a lasting difficulty to report on. So and maybe one more thing I'll name before we take more questions or move on or open up is the numbers here. I just want to emphasize this is not a study that's trying to get at how frequent are lasting difficulties overall. Some people have attempted that. 1 to 10%, maybe it's more. we're 100% lasting difficulties in this study. So everything we're looking at is based on that pie of only people who've had lasting adverse effects. So that's just I'm just offering that context. Yeah. Or sorry, him first, and then Michael. Maybe we can.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, clarifying of the like adverse or like difficult experiences. Are
Yeah.
you looking for stuff that is specifically sort of something you would consider more like clinical, like you said, like maybe having physical sensation or like a mental like anxiety or depression, or also like interpersonal things, like things that may have changed how you think about a person or something like that?
That's a really good question. We're definitely not narrowly clinically focused. We ask some questions about isolation, alienation, not feeling understood by other people. If I have a regret, or sorry, we ask, we don't necessarily, we ask about symptoms, but then we also ask about impacts. So there's also, we ask about how did this affect your relationships, your job performance, your other things like that. So it's all, we ask about it all, should just say. Yeah. Come to think of it. Yeah.
I think he sort of asked an offshoot of what I'm thinking along the line. But, okay, so I guess my question is, you're focusing on a very small percentage. You're focusing on the negative effects of, which is probably a fairly small, I think you said 1 to 10% maybe, of the total people having experiences, and especially on the lasting ones. So are you looking for like, are you just looking to get general data so you can start looking in this area? Are you looking for causal things? Are you looking for this trends to usually be in these categories? Are you kind of doing all the above? I'm just trying to get a feel for what this is looking, because it seems like you're
Yeah.
concentrating it on like a very small area of like the bell curve or whatever,
Yeah.
like the very bottom of it, the bottom end of it. But you can see why you would definitely want to know that stuff.
Yeah.
And to help you avoid causal things and bad settings and et cetera, et cetera. So that's my question.
Totally. I mean, the broad answer is all the above. And maybe the 1 to 10% is an understatement, because again, I believe that's for like up to a year. And we're willing to talk to people whose lasting adverse effects were like, I was messed up for a week. So, it may be closer to that mid-range. And again, we're not even saying, as I said before, the lasting adverse effects don't have to dominate, don't have to swamp other lasting effects for someone to qualify for this study. But yeah, first and foremost, we're interested in we're asking more questions than anyone's ever asked before. Because we want to map the landscape in greater detail than ever before. That's just good basic research science. But you're absolutely right. I mean, causality is tricky, but we do want to know what predicts those. Number one, what predicts just overall having an adverse effect? What in someone's mental health history, demographics, setting, intention is predictive of that? Maybe what drug is more or less predictive of it? We're also interested in what predicts one kind of adverse impact versus another. If it knows, please connect it with me. But I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. But what I was gonna say is, and we're also interested in seeing what helps. We ask a lot of questions about what did you try, like in great detail. Taking more psychedelics, staying away from psychedelics, taking prescription medications, going to therapy, talking to friends and family, um, starting a meditation practice, you name it. Talking to ChatGPT, that's not a joke. We're interested in people's use of AI tools for integration, helpful, harmful. Um, my suspicion is that we'll see trends in all these things, but I don't think there's any one size fits all story. My favorite thing about psychedelics and the principle that I always emphasize is um, there's no one psychedelic experience, there's no one psychedelic trajectory. And the great mystery of these things is how varied they are in their effects and all the different ingredients that go into possibly beginning to explain that variance.
What you mentioned something, so you also would be interested in something that might be moderately short term, like a sort of a come down kind of experience or a hangover-ish, or I was nervous for 3 or 4 days or a week or, stuff like that. You're interested in that as well.
We are, yeah. If somebody has a distinct enough recollection of it as something that lasted beyond the trip for a few days, a week, that qualifies. Yeah. Again, it's the good news is we're asking about so many different variables. We're getting such a big sample of people that we can slice and dice the data however we want. So, yeah. Rachel.
A huge part of adverse experiences comes from lack of education and risk reduction. Can you please provide us with some educational resources and risk reduction resources?
Okay, that's a great one. Yeah. I feel like you may be able to contribute on this one too. After I mean, there is the Zendo project does a lot of great work to support people having challenging experiences in the moment, and also some resources to help them with lasting effects. That's one. There's also the Fireside Project that offers remote, uh, like peer support for challenging psychedelic experiences. I believe maybe ICEERS in Europe provides integration support for people who are trying to work through difficult stuff in the aftermath of the psychedelic experience. And another really interesting project that is near and dear to our hearts is the Challenging Psychedelic Experiences Project, run by Jules Evans, who is a journalist and activist in this space, who is really dedicated to amplifying the stories of people who've had lasting adverse effects from psychedelics and connecting them to the right sources of support. Because a lot of people will go to a mainstream psychologist, psychiatrist dealing with some of these issues, and it could either be that there's stigma and judgment, or that simply put, there isn't training or understanding to help people who are going through some of these issues. And another thing is, we don't know yet whether somatic disturbances, depression, anxiety type symptoms brought on by psychedelics respond to the same kind of treatments that these things uh, respond to when they're not brought on. Fun fact, besides having a research career, I'm clinically trained. I'm going to be licensed soon. And like one of my main priorities is helping people prepare, integrate, pick up the pieces, navigate difficulties after the fact. Uh, from the perspective of someone who does the research, knows the research, and doesn't consider any of this stuff too weird or alien. And I think there's a real thirst for that out there. Um, because even if a minority of people have serious impairment that lasts a significant amount of time from psychedelics, More and more people are taking psychedelics, often without the requisite education, um, often without realizing that psychedelics are a bit of a wild card. That's part of their beauty and gift. And, often without having laid the groundwork for a safe landing. This is also part of my dissertation research, I think in a cruder way, got at some of the factors that I think are protected against, well, not protective against adverse effects, but predictive of getting better effects out of psychedelics. I also have some like question prompts. I'm not sure if we need them. Um, I just want to have a conversation. How much time do we have to just continue the conversation? Okay, not bad. These are some prompts here. I'm not going to read through them all and waste people's time, but maybe we could just again have a dialogue. We could talk about any of these things or just like anything else you want to talk about. Oh,
I do have a question, but then pass on the mic.
okay, and then yeah.
Okay. Um, I know doctor-patient privilege. What's the possibility of the GBI coming and saying we'd like a list of people that are in your study, because in the state of Georgia, you are asking people to talk about their experience, which is a Schedule 1 felony.
Yeah. I've been asked this, and on a certain level, right? Am I in the picture if I sit? I'm just curious. Okay, sweet. Yeah. I mean, that is a hard question. I've been asked it before by prospective participants because we cannot make any blanket guarantees. We live in very unpredictable times. We have extensive procedures in place that ensure like fast anonymization of our data. We store participant identifiers, and then sort of the key that links the identifier, or sorry, participant data with identifiers is stored on a separate server from the key that links identifiers to actual emails. In theory, any any authoritarian regime that's determined enough to run roughshod over personal freedoms and academic privacy protocols can do that if they want. But we've had every indication that for all of the things that are in jeopardy these days, I mean, the Department of Defense is sending millions of dollars to the state of Georgia and the state of Georgia's legislature is authorizing the earmarking of funding for psychedelic clinical trials happening all here. Again, a lot of it under the umbrella of Emory. It feels like even more of a stretch to criminalize people talking about experiences that they've had in the past. To my knowledge, that's never been illegal, at least in this country. But I can't make an 100% guarantee. And if anyone is concerned about that, I hear them. Yes.
Hey, I am curious if there are any academic experiments involving psychedelia on the topic of the discovery of consciousness and what it actually means, that you are particularly excited about, that's maybe upcoming or currently occurring, maybe at Emory or otherwise.
Okay, let me think. I might fumble this. I don't know if it's directly a matter of one view of or one framework that's used that's become very popular these days in computational neuroscience and trying to sort of locate the foundations of consciousness in neurocomputational dynamics is the free energy principle and the idea that the brain exists to minimize surprise and free energy and chaos. And it creates a model of the world in which our consciousness is something that comes online, that emerges in order to register and notice all of the moments in which something surprising is happening, that something is swimming against the default hum. And there's been a lot of interesting crosstalk between psychedelic researchers and computational neuroscientists studying the free energy principle in trying to figure out when we construct our reality. And this is less about like what is the fundamental nature of consciousness or substance of consciousness, but how do we construct our reality? When I say this, I'm making the statement that is pretty mainstream in neuroscience and cognitive science, but may sound crazy otherwise, which is that reality as we experience it is kind of a controlled hallucination. And psychedelics, kind of whatever theory you buy into, psychedelics show us that the terms of the controlled hallucination are very, very specific. They're preset by our evolutionary history, by our genes, by our neuroanatomy, and that if you throw a psychedelic compound, one psychedelic compound or another, into the mix, it changes the balance between streams of information, between how much emphasis we put on our top-down pre-existing priors about how the world is, and bottom-up sensory experience. So taking psychedelics changes the balance between these streams of input, and that is reflected in different patterns of connectivity in the brain. And I think it really reveals that our idea of what at least default waking human consciousness is a very narrow one. And I think just taking psychedelics can very often show us a window to other possibilities for, you know, how one can be conscious outside of the default range of presets. And the collaborations I'd point to on this specific topic, there are more and more, are a number of papers authored over the last 6 or 7 years by Carl Friston, computational neuroscientist, and Robin Carhart Harris, who I've mentioned, who's a premier psychedelic researcher who I've collaborated a little bit with. But I'm sure that other people could provide even more interesting answers to that question. Consciousness is a more popular topic of inquiry than ever. So, yeah, for sure, great question.
And my question is just, I'm Tyler.
Hi.
So it's the 800-person research study that you're doing, and then there's another kind of component for another 800 folks.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what the outcome of the research will be in your minds. Do you imagine it unfolding as a series of papers that start with cataloging and then talk about different, prevention methods or solutions after the fact? Like, how do you see it unfolding in terms of the stories that you'll be able to tell from the research, the learnings?
Yeah.
And what would be the limitation of understanding from the study that you would be excited to get into further research from there? I don't know if you understand the intent of the question.
I think I got most of it. I mean, it's going to be a lot of papers. The first thing that we're working on is just publishing the protocol and outlining kind of exactly what you're asking right now. It's a very complex study. that asks a lot of questions and has multiple components that unfold over time, large number of participants. So, right, first, like we're trying to actually develop new measurement instruments out of some of the item sets that we ask, like a new validated battery for asking about psychedelic related difficulties. Like we have a big item set and we eventually want to crunch it down so that people can use it in a modular way in new studies. We want to publish specific papers on clustering of different kinds of difficulties, predictors of difficulties, predictors of recovery from difficulties, all of that. So there's that. But what we also want to do is sort of treat this data set as a platform for the use of teams all over the world, because we cannot run all of these analyses. There are like thousands of possible, tens of thousands of possible combinations and configurations of variables you could run in meaningful ways. You could analyze, relationships between. So we plan to open this up to thoughtful, well-meaning researchers to, find their own stories. I hope that answers. Great.
You said we could ask questions about anything, so I'm going to ask
Yeah.
a softball question. Is there any piece of media and or anything that you enjoy that surrounds the topic of psychedelics? Like I think about Common Side Effects, if you've seen that show. Just
No,
shows, movies, or anything, music, something that surrounds the topic of psychedelics that you really enjoy, that you're like, I get jazzed about this because
Okay.
it's about things that I'm interested in.
Yeah. Oh wow. Let me think. I feel like I've fallen a little bit out of touch with some of that, but I wasn't in this mode going into this talk, but it's super important. I mean, I know what I personally associate with psychedelics and all these fronts, but in terms of media, this is really, I mean, I'm a big fan of not specific to the adverse effects, but I'm a big fan of, and it's like the home base. I've been on the show twice now. Psychedelics Today, the great podcast. Have you, Joe Moore and Kyle Buller? I think it's the biggest psychedelics podcast. They have episodes every week. They're like the hundreds, 500-600 episodes. Really thoughtful guys. We have a podcast focused on this study that's set to drop very soon. So I like psychedelics today. I'm also a huge fan, actually, come to think of it, of he stopped running his podcast, Expanding Mind, years ago. But from 2016 to 2019, I was an avid listener to Eric Davis's Expanding Mind, which is all about like really fringe topics in psychedelic culture. He's a religious studies PhD, but a lot of his work deals with, sort of the forgotten period in psychedelic exploration from the 70s to the 90s, really. It's sort of Terence McKenna was also an important voice for that in the latter half of that period, but it's also often overshadowed by the period before it and now the current Renaissance. But Expanding Mind / Anything Ever Written by Eric Davis, who wrote Technosis as well. Obviously, I also love Terence McKenna content. Yeah, psychedelic music can mean a lot of things. I, for me, like the ultimate psychedelic music is still Beatles and also George Harrison's first solo album, but also two of my psychedelic gurus are Alice and John Coltrane, especially Alice Coltrane. I mean, to listen to that stuff, it's very hard to believe that it was made on this planet sometimes. So, yeah, I love to talk one-on-one about what you get inspired by.
So Josh,
Yeah.
you had mentioned that you had a center for veterans in Brookhaven. Could you say a little bit more about that was suffering from PTSD?
Yeah, the Emory Veterans Health Program, which I'm tangentially involved in at Emory Psychiatry at Executive Park. Again, not all of their work with veterans is psychedelic research, but it's a pioneering center for psychedelic research. A trial focused on MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD just wrapped up, and it's MDMA combined with a cutting edge therapeutic modality called prolonged exposure. And these things had never been combined before in a research study, and now they're doing the same thing with psilocybin.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we will, Sam always likes to say this. So people get our name wrong all the time.
Yeah.
Our name is Mushroom Club of Georgia. It's not on this slide. It's the previous slide.
Okay. What did I say?
You said Georgia Mushroom Club.
My apologies.
Sam likes to say mushrooms come first.
Yeah, it's true. Mushrooms were here before the state boundaries.
Before anything.
Before anything, yeah.
So, anyway, if you could change that on your slide,
yes, I'd be happy to.
Greatly appreciate it. So, and speaking of talking to people afterwards, we often, and it is time to actually start breaking down and clearing out, but we often have people talking under this carport area after the meeting. So, we're going to actually put a stop to questions now, but if you can stay and then talk with people out there, that would be great. In case.
And can I just have two small calls to action before we?
Sure.
So, first of all, if anybody uses Substack, please subscribe to my Substack, which is Whitmanic. Actually, Walt Whitman is my original psychedelic guru. I plan to write more about that, but whitmanic.substack.com. Please subscribe. Free subscription is fine. I write about psychedelics, culture, consciousness, history, and many other things. That's whitmanic.substack.com. And if anyone is interested in even possibly enrolling in our study, like I'm happy to just come up to me. I'm gonna hand these out before I start talking. But again, it's paid. It's an awesome study. It's gonna make a huge impact, and it's not just one study. It's really like a platform for years and years of research inquiry.
Nice. Or you might have a friend, right? So.
Or you might, oh yes, you very well might have a friend. So who's had difficulties that lasted beyond the trip.
So you want the mic?
And the reason that we ask people to, take the conversation outside under the carport is because there's a person who is working from the church here who can't leave until the room is done and ready. And we'll have people in here talking, and he's still waiting. So it's a very thoughtful thing for him. But also, we need to put this room back together. It did. Kevin, can you stay and help with this? Okay, I'm going to bring you over here.
Thank you. It was a joy, really. Yeah. Oh, I mean, I kind of don't know why I haven't yet. So.
The what club?
The Mushroom Club of Georgia.
Yes.